Welcome to Shauns Take, brought to you by the Keystone Sports Network. Here are your hosts, Shaun and Jim.
Hello and welcome to Shauns Take, brought to you by the Keystone Sports Network. I'm Jim Galante. He is Sean Gold. Sean, we missed out on our show last week. I missed you.
I missed you too, Jim. It was a hectic week, but I'm back and I'm ready for this week. We got a lot of exciting topics. Obviously, March Madness is going on. We're going to talk about that. But first, there was some other news that happened, sad news in the sports world. George Foreman, Jim, passed away, 76 years old, an absolute legend in the sport of boxing and beyond. Before we get into basketball talk, I wanted to get, some of your George Foreman memories. Let's talk about a really legendary person, not just boxing career first.
I'm really fascinated by this because, Sean, George Foreman was probably one of the most famous people in the world when he was the boxing champion of the world. But it was also, I think it tells us a lot about the difference in the sports world when George Foreman was at his peak, how prominent boxing was and how different that is today. For a young guy like your age, I'm not sure how much you remember George Foreman, but at the time, way back, I'll go way back to 1968 when he came onto the scene. It was at the Olympics, and boxing was important then in the Olympics also. He was a gold medal champion, most famous at that Olympics, and you'd have to go into your history books a little bit here, Sean. The 60s, very volatile time, and even in the Olympics, there were a lot of protests going on. And George Foreman endeared himself to a lot of people. After he won his gold medal, he was in the ring waving a United States flag. Really endeared him to a lot of people. He then had an opportunity, and this is right in the middle of when Muhammad Ali was at his peak and the heavyweight champion. Eventually, he got stripped of the heavyweight championship, ultimately came back, lost to Joe Frazier, and it was George Foreman who took his title from Joe Frazier. And that fight actually took place in Jamaica, which now might seem a little unusual, but that's how they did things with those fights. They went far off places. A couple years later, George Foreman lost his title to Muhammad Ali, and it was in a fight where, to show you what a great fighter Muhammad Ali was, this was the fight where, have you ever heard the expression rope-a-dope?
Not too much.
Well, you'll still hear it on occasion, but it actually originated in this fight where Muhammad Ali beat George Foreman by essentially tiring him out, letting him just punch himself out by leaning back into the ropes. In fact, there was some thought that Muhammad Ali's camp loosened up the ropes to allow him, as George Foreman's throwing his punches, Ali would just be backing up into the ropes, absorbing the punches until Foreman tired himself out, and Muhammad Ali ended up getting the title back from him. The interesting thing with George Foreman, he then came back, won a heavyweight title at 45 years old, the oldest heavyweight champion. And what's amazing is I think most people today, if you ask them about George Foreman, they'll think of the Foreman Grill, and that's what he's most famous for. But I think the world has just changed so much in sports. Sean, I have no idea who the heavyweight champion of the world is today. And I can't even tell you the last time I saw a boxing match.
I completely agree on that. I don't think boxing has the same meaning that it used to have. And not that I was ever a huge boxing fan, but I remember watching a documentary on the Rumble in the Jungle, and just the crowds that they drew at those fights, at these heavyweight fights, was amazing. And now, we get a couple. I remember just in my lifetime, I've watched the Wilder Fury fights. I watched Mayweather Pacquiao, and those were big deals, but you can just tell it does not compare to what it once was. And I think it's amazing what George Foreman, Muhammad Ali did for the sport of boxing. And that was, you stopped your world to watch those fights. And that just doesn't happen today anymore. And it's really a testament to just how incredible, George Foreman, Ali, all these big boxers back then were. And it's cool to look back on it for me, being somebody who never was very invested in boxing growing up. It's cool to watch, some of these highlights of these guys and just get a sense of how meaningful it was. It was bigger than a sport back then. And I don't know that you can say the same thing right now.
It really has changed. I think you're right. And the one last note from that Rumble in the Jungle and then the Frazier versus Foreman when Foreman beat him. I don't know if you've ever heard the "Down goes Frazier, down goes Frazier." That was from the Foreman Joe Frazier fight.
That's right.
Where it came from.
Iconic announcement right there. I mean, that's one that you don't have to be a boxing fan to have heard. Down goes Frazier.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's shift gears. Let's get back now to tournament basketball. We are right smack in the middle of it. I take a look at that first weekend when you still have 64 teams. You have 32 games from Thursday through Sunday. To me, Shaun, that is the greatest weekend in sports.
It's really hard to top that. I mean, I get excited for the Super Bowl, but when you can wake up and go to bed and have games on all day, that's the life right there. And I got to say, my biggest takeaway so far from the tournament, Jim, is this is not the year of the underdogs. Every year in March Madness, we're looking for the Cinderella story. I remember watching a video before that there was this trend where I think the past 4 or 5 years, somebody had bet every single underdog of the tournament in every single game, and they were making a pretty good amount of money off of that. I haven't done the math, but I don't think they're too profitable right now if that's what they've been doing so far this tournament. We really have seen the heavy hitters, the 1, 2, and 3 seeds, oftentimes are looking like the best teams in the tournament, and we're not getting any major runs from these smaller schools like we have in past years where you get, multiple double-digit seeds kind of getting into the round of 32, into the Sweet 16. So I think my biggest takeaway so far has just been they did a good job with the seeding this year. All these teams that are ranked at the top are playing like it.
And to your point, all 4 number 1 seeds and 3 out of 4 number 2 seeds have advanced to the Sweet 16. So that is pretty good seeding, as you said, and maybe it was time to bet chalk this year. My question to you, Shaun, is do you think there's any meaning to that? By that, I mean, there are some folks who are going to say NIL played a factor in this. If you're not one of the big schools, you can't retain your talent. Do you think that's the case of what's happening this year?
No, I think that's the case in football for sure. I think basketball's a different beast, and not that NIL doesn't play a role in it, because it definitely does, and these teams that can spend more obviously can get more talent, but I think it's different in basketball. And in a March Madness tournament, you can have an all NIL team versus a no NIL team, and that no NIL team still has a shot. If they get hot from 3, it's different in football where you can just physically dominate a team. If you have the offensive and defensive line advantages and you're just superior in the lines, in the trenches, there's not much you can do as an opponent. In basketball, though, you can out-scheme teams. And me, Ivy League, I've seen Yale in the tournament 3 of the past 4 years. They came close this year, fell apart at the end. But last year, Yale beat Auburn, a no NIL school versus Auburn's got some good NIL things cooking up there. So that shows, from personal experience that on any given day in a March Madness tournament, anyone can go pick up a win. And I really think this year has been more these top seeds not getting lackadaisical to start the tournament. A lot of times you kind of think, I'm a 2 or 3 seed going up against a 14 or 15 seed team. There's no shot that they can beat us. And then all of a sudden you come out slow. They hit some shots and you've got a game. These teams, to their credit, have put their foot on the gas from start to finish this year.
They definitely have. And I'm also with you. I think this is a 1-year kind of thing where it worked out that way. Because I do think in basketball, as opposed to football, it doesn't take nearly the same investment. A couple players, 2, 3 good players, and you will be able to compete. The other thing that goes on in basketball, a lot of the heavyweights, their best players are one and done. They come in freshmen, they play a year in college basketball, then they make their way to the NBA. Where some of these smaller schools, they will have players maybe not good enough to even draw attention from the bigger programs, but players play together for 3 or 4 years, become as a group of 22-year-old or 23-year-olds playing a bunch of perhaps more talented but 18-year-olds who are freshmen, and the mature team that's played together, they are the ones who prevail. I think we'll get back to that in another year, Shaun.
I definitely think so. I do not think this is going to be something to expect year in, year out. And it would be almost historic if we actually do have all number one seeds end up in the Final Four. I'd have to go back and look at how many times that's happened, but I know it is not a lot. And it's something that you cannot come to expect. So it's almost as if this is the upset tournament because we're not getting upsets right now, if you will. Now, Jim, the big question that I have is, what's your bracket looking like right now? How are you doing? Do you still have the perfect bracket? I know I don't, but maybe you got something I don't have.
Far, far from perfect. And there's always the debate, the internal debate with yourself when you put together your bracket. How much do you go chalk, go with the favorites, and you feel like to really win this thing, you've got to get some upsets somewhere. Well, I'm okay in that my final two, just give it up, Duke and Florida. I think they are easily the two best teams. And I think Duke is the best team. I have Duke winning it all, which is not a surprise, I'm sure, to anybody. I had Florida as my runner-up. So both teams are still there. My other two Final Four teams, they're gone. So my only hope is, the final two. I know there'll be a lot of people in my pool who have Duke, Florida. So I didn't do enough otherwise to win. So I guess I just need a Duke, Florida final to end up respectable. How about yourself?
I'm in the same exact boat. Duke, Florida final, Duke winning it all. I think I normally don't go with the top pick. Last year, I tried to fade UConn to be different. Obviously, that didn't work out. They cruised their way. This year, I felt like I learned my lesson from last year. Cooper Flagg is leading a very, very dangerous Duke team right now, and they're just a complete team. And I don't think you can say that about a lot of teams in the tournament. It's hard to find the weakness of this Duke Blue Devil team. So my Final Four was Duke against Gonzaga. I tried to go, with the dangerous pick there. They nearly got past Houston, not enough. I think if Gonzaga was still in it, I would have a shot in my pool, but I'm going to need a lot to go right. And then I've got Florida against Auburn. I went pretty chalk on that side of the bracket. And, we're going to see. We're going to see if the math can math for me in this one as I go up against the fellow people. Everyone's in a bit of a mess right now. I need a lot to go right for me if I'm going to win my pool here, but I'm just hoping that at least I can get Duke right as a national champion and pick the real winner of the tournament.
Well, I lied. I said that I only have Duke and Florida Final Four. I actually also have Kentucky for Final Four, so I've got a shot there. They're a number 3 seed, so that wasn't me digging deep like you did with Gonzaga, but my best chance is a Duke Florida final with Duke winning, and hope I'm in one of those large polls where you get money down the line. So all I'm hoping is to pretty much get my initial investment back. So, Shaun, that leads us to looking forward. We've got a Sweet 16, some pretty nice matchups. It's interesting. I was looking at the spreads here. Most of the spreads range from like 4 to 7, 8 points like that. So I think there's only one spread that's less than 4 points, and that's Ole Miss and Michigan State. Michigan State being a 3.5-point favorite. But Sweet 16, that means we've got 8 games. That means I'm looking for Shauns Take. I'm looking for your best bets coming forward.
All right. Well, let's get into it. Let's start in the South. Auburn, Michigan. This is an interesting game. I'm not 100% convinced that I'm going to be correct with Auburn getting to the Final Four anymore, but I don't think Michigan is going to be the team that stands in their way here. Michigan has looked really good. They handled a very good Texas A&M team, 91-79. That was a dominant victory, but I do think that Auburn is built for a run. I am concerned here, but I would take Auburn to advance to the Elite Eight in this game. And then
Do you have them covering the 8.5?
I would say no. I think there's been a lot of blowout wins so far in this tournament. I think we're going to start to see these underdogs cover a bit more. And Michigan's a big team, and they can help control the pace in this game. So I think Auburn wins, but not by more than 8.5.
That's I think that's a pretty solid pick there. I like that. Do you have any other picks?
My favorite game that I'm looking forward to is going to be Ole Miss, Michigan State. I think both of these teams, from what I've seen so far, are good enough to make the Final Four and beat whoever comes out of the Michigan-Auburn game. I want to say I would go with Ole Miss because I was big on Iowa State, and they got manhandled by this Ole Miss team. But the Big Ten, Jim, as you know, has been so good in this tournament. So give me Michigan State to cover the spread and advance to the Elite Eight in this one.
You know, it's interesting you brought up the Big Ten and how now the first round, the Big Ten was actually 8-0, very impressive. The Southeast Conference, which got a record 14 teams into the tournament, they were 8-6 in that first round, and it started some of that chatter about, well, maybe they're not quite as good as they want to let people believe. Well, they go and win 7 out of 8 games, advance 7 teams to the Sweet 16. So I think that you talk about Ole Miss, Michigan State. Ole Miss is just the number 6 seed, but that's a number 6 seed coming out of the Southeast Conference. So I think that's a dangerous team. And again, coming out of that conference, you have to do pretty well to be at the top half or the top quarter of the Southeast Conference, and Ole Miss was able to do that, Shaun.
Definitely, and I think that's my game of this round. Other games that I'm looking forward to, and I want to get your take on this, Florida, Maryland. I think that's a very, very interesting game. Maryland probably has the best starting 5 in the country. Now, they don't have the depth some of these other teams have. Do you think there's a shot that Maryland, who's played some very good basketball so far, can pull off an upset against Florida?
No. I know. I think I had Duke and Florida, as I mentioned earlier, as my final 2. And I'm going to jump ahead to my picks here, if I could, Shaun. I actually have Duke and Florida. Duke's an 8.5-point favorite. Florida's a 6.5-point favorite. And I actually believe, I know what you're saying about Maryland, but I think Duke and Florida actually, besides the depth, have better starting 5s than Maryland does. And I think Duke, I think, is just loaded with first-round picks. Everyone wants to talk about Cooper Flag. Obviously, that he's the best player in the country, but they have 3 or 4 guys who are going to be first-round draft picks in the NBA. That's Duke. I think Florida is also a very talented team. I actually have Florida as one of my picks, even though they'll be giving up 6.5 points to Maryland.
I don't know that I could go with the upset here, and I do think maybe the first half we see a very, very tight game, but then Florida's one of those teams, just like Duke is, where there's another 20 minutes to go after halftime, and that's a very long 20 minutes when you're taking on a team like this. So I want to say that a number 1 seed can go down, but I'm not sure that I see it, and I don't know if you agree with that. Do you see a number 1 seed having a shot at following? And if there is a number 1 seed that's not going to make it out of the sweep, out of this round, who would it be?
Boy, that's a good question. I think if a number 1 seed would go down, I think it's Auburn against Michigan. I don't see Houston losing to Purdue. Now, I'm not real high on this Houston team, but I still think they'll be better than Purdue. Our colleague Dustin Schutte, who's involved with us, he's a Purdue guy. I'm not sure he would want to hear that from me, but I think Auburn is the number 1 seed that's most likely to fall, Shaun.
I agree with that. And I think if they do get past Michigan, I'm not convinced that they get past Ole Miss or Michigan State. Whoever wins that game is going to be very hot because both teams have been hot, and then you get a big-time win. So if there's a team I don't see making the Final Four now, it would be Auburn, because I think that Michigan's a really good test. And then I think whoever it is, Ole Miss or Michigan State, is an even better test that they're going to have to go through. So I think they have the toughest pathway to get there right now. And I would say if there's a number 1 seed that I see falling, I'm in agreement. It's going to be Auburn.
Well, we talked earlier about our picks to make it to the finals. I had Duke and Florida, with Duke winning that. Have you seen anything to change your mind on that, Shaun?
No. And it's funny. I was listening to something else the other day. Same exact question was asked. And how can you not continue to think that Duke is the best team? Florida, they got a scare from UConn. Now, I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt because UConn had back-to-back experience on their side. It wasn't the same UConn Husky team of last year or the year before, but anytime you've won 2 consecutive national champions and you're in a tournament, you're a dangerous team no matter who's on your roster. So I'm going to give them benefit of the doubt there that they faced a very experienced tournament team. Now I think Florida's going to be back on track. I am a little concerned about Maryland, but I wouldn't switch my Final Four pick and my national champion pick to be Duke versus Florida, with Duke winning it all.
I'm with you. I have Duke winning it all. I think they're well coached, well disciplined, and a boatload of talent there, Shaun. So I still have the Dukies winning it over Florida in the finals. I'm glad you brought up that Florida game against UConn. I'll say it. I thought UConn, they played with the heart of a champion in that game. They played hard. They played tough. They were physical. They did all of those things. Florida was just the more talented team. And I think that's the test that Florida had, in this tournament, which always seems to happen. It doesn't go smoothly all the way through. But I still have Duke winning it all against Florida. We shall see if they still get there when we talk next week for the Final Four. Shaun, that is the final word for our show this week. Thank you, Shaun. Thank you all for listening. Join us next week on Shauns Take.
Keystone Sports Network.